Welcome, champions, to the next overview and tier list ranking, featuring the newest champion. This is where we'll break down their mechanics and place them in my overall tier list for every champion in the game. And with the release of Events 2.0, that means we have a reworked champion to reanalyze as well. And forgive me if I sound a little off, I'm just coming down from a very bad cold. Like I'm telling you, I don't know how my body has produced this much mucus. But before all of that, I have a brief announcement. There has been talk of potentially reworking the tier list a little bit, as there have been many shifts in power since I started making lists nearly 2 years ago. The game has essentially changed, but those I've ranked in the past haven't changed along with the times. So what's a good fix for that? Here's my solution. I'm going to go back through the champions one by one while live streaming. I'm going to present the champions and open the floor to any one of you who wants to be a part of it. You will have a chance to voice your own opinion or just listen along as I present them to you. I plan to do this seat by seat, with each day being dedicated to a seat. 3 streams a week, so to reach 12 seats, that will take a month of streaming. Stop on in to hang out or try to sway my opinion of champions with your own opinions. This still won't be for a little while, but the plan is just before the next event starts, April 29th. Streaming Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday, starting at 11 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. Though this is tentative, it's what I plan to stick to. You can follow the Twitch channel now if you'd like, of the same name, Tyredack, over on Twitch. And if you happen to see me online streaming before that time, that's just me working out the kinks. But by all means, if you see it, drop on in and say hi. Anyway, let's get started by talking about Gale, the true neutral human wizard in Seed 1. Newest member of the Absolute Adversaries, and serves the group as a support. But he does have pseudo-tanking capability, just not the tanking tag. His basic attack is the cantrip Firebolt, which deals 1 hit of damage and prioritizes enemies he has not yet hit. His ultimate attack is Gale's Gale, where he casts a gust of wind, knocking all enemies back, damaging them, and slowing them for 15 seconds. His damage buffing primarily comes from Archmage's Insight, where he increases the damage of champions in the 2 columns in front of him. Though he also has Netherese Orb, where he will debuff an enemy when he hits them, making them take more damage from all attacks. This is why it's important that his basic attack prioritizes enemies he has not yet hit. And yes, to those who may be thinking it, this does increase click damage. And this attack is not sticky, meaning if you remove Gale from your formation, it will not remain. Before we go into his next ability, it's important to note that with the release of Gale, we also have a whole new patron, Elminster. I always say it out loud like that, I don't know why. I don't know what's wrong with me. The most important thing to know about this patron is that his restriction works quite different than other patrons. He will only ever allow the use of champions who have been released or reworked within the last 3 years to the current date. And the reworks are tied to events, so those reworked from previous seasons do not count. Of course, champions like Dungeon Master and the Dark Urge will still be usable with their restriction-breaking mechanics, but this will be rough for those whose formations rely on champions older than that. Keeping that in mind, if your pushing formation relies on champions who might be teetering on being restricted soon because of that time frame, you may want to work on pushing the harder patron variants as soon as possible. This is noteworthy for Gale, though, as he has the formation ability Ally of Elminster, where he can be used in any Elminster patron adventure or variant regardless of restriction. And he also scales Archmage's Insight for each Elminster patron variant you have completed, stacking multiplicatively, with an experienced sage. This is basically a copy-paste of how Karlach scales with Zariel patron variant completions. His specialization picks are pretty important to how you'll use him. He has 2 sets of options. The first grants some position tweaking and utility, and they are between his wizard archetypes. Evocation will make his basic attack a small area of effect, so he can apply his debuff to multiple targets. Abjuration will cause attacks against your champions to miss 50% of the time, granting some form of survivability to your entire formation. Enchantment will increase the column distance of Archmage's Insight to 3 columns instead of 2, and Illusion will change the positioning entirely, making him even more similar to Karlach, buffing those in his column and one column behind him. Also, enemies that attempt to attack Gale will instead have to choose another champion in his shared column. This makes him a valid off-tank option, much like Turiel, and grants the absolute adversaries a whole lot more utility with this pseudo-tanking role. The second set of choices are all different ways to increase his Netherese Orb's efficiency. The first is Ceramorphosis, where he adds a stack of Ceramorphosis to the group, and increases Netherese Orb for each current stack of Ceramorphosis, stacking multiplicatively. This is a very strange move in my opinion, to not only have Ceramorphosis scaling tied to his specialization, the only other of the group who does that, again, is Karlach, but also to have the base Ceramorphosis stack tied to his specializations is very weird. No other absolute adversary does that, it just comes naturally. And this will basically be the required pick if your DPS is the Dark Urge, because he needs Ceramorphosis, as well as the rest of the affiliation really. Strange. Second is Mystical Mentor, where he increases the effect of Netherese Orb for each champion in the formation with an intelligence of 13 or higher, stacking again multiplicatively. And lastly, Finite Fellowship, where he increases the effect of Netherese Orb for each champion you have unlocked that is not eligible for the current adventure, stacking multiplicatively. This will inevitably come in handy for severely restricted runs you might be attempting. His equipment is average: 1 for all damage, 1 for Archmage's Insight and Netherese Orb, 1 for Experienced Sage, and then just ultimate attack damage and reduced ultimate cooldown. No way to scale Ceramorphosis or his specializations in general. With his feats you can scale his specializations a bit, which is handy. And other than that, nothing too special, except an alignment changing feat, which will shift him to neutral good. This is important for 2 main reasons. First, it makes him viable for the Mert patron, as he is normally neutral and doesn't naturally qualify, and allows him to scale up at least one side of the Dark Urge in his affiliation, who scales with either evil or good champions depending on specialization choices. So what about his achievement and adventure variants? His achievement is rather simple, only requiring you to push back 1,000 enemies with his ultimate. So just be sure to actively use it, or farm it up by letting a lot of enemies build up on screen and get to pushing. He is forced in your formation for all of the variants, and for the first, you also can't move him. And on top of that, only those affected by his Archmage's Insight can deal damage, which you would want anyway while being forced to use him, so not much of a restriction. Shouldn't hold you back. The second will only allow you to use champions who have an intelligence of 13 or higher, are heroes of Baldur's Gate, or are absolute adversaries. If you've been focusing on the absolute adversaries, this will be perfect for you, as this includes everyone with a Ceramorphosis stack, though Narak will need his intelligence feat to qualify. And for those who don't, this still does include quite a few strong options. But this will lock out a lot of heavy hitters like Spurt, Antreus, Crux, and Warduke. Keep an eye out on those intelligence feats if you need them for the likes of Valentine, Zorbu, Black Viper, and Human. The third throws Elminster in your formation, taking up a slot and increasing the attack cooldown of those adjacent to him. The Elminster restriction is in play for this run, only allowing the most recent 3 years worth of champions. Though you are also graced with the 12 core champions to use as well. This has the potential to really hamstring a lot of people out there, so good luck on this one. I hope your formation doesn't rely on something that is restricted. His availability is alright, ready for all but the strength day 1 trials restrictions. And because of that strength, and well, his charisma, he is locked out of the Zariel patron, and only available for Mert with a feat, but available for the other patrons and always present for Elminster. His scaling is a bit of a head scratcher to me when compared with his affiliation and the precedent they set, but that doesn't mean he's bad. Once you've knocked out a lot of the Elminster patron runs, his Archmage's Insight will be decent, and he also has a good debuff. Nothing crazy, but good tools. The problem is, of course, is in his own affiliation synergy. If you saw my last video, you know there are already problems with the Dark Urge fully qualifying for Will's folk hero, and one of those problems was that there are too many humans. Well, here we are with another human. And not only that, a lot of the ways you would make him qualify for Will's folk hero was Nixie and or Kira, who are in the same seat as Gale. So if you want to use the affiliation, it is very difficult to make him qualify. And we're gonna have to drop some Ceramorphosis to make it happen, which is counterintuitive as the Dark Urge scales with Ceramorphosis stacks. A lot of these problems would be fixed if they would just give the Dark Urge a human glitch feat. Please do it. In order to make it work, you're going to have to drop Dynahair and Minsk as Ceramorphosis options, as that's just too many humans. Then use either Mehen or Egbert for an additional Dragonborn. Narak is still a safe Ceramorphosis option, as there will only be 2 Gith and no monks to contend with his class. Then you have a filler slot where Dynahair would fit perfectly, if she wasn't a human and a wizard, to nudge Dirge out both race and class, since that's exactly what Gale is. In the future, Jaheira will get a Ceramorphosis stack, but she would add too many fighters. So it can't be any Ceramorphosis user at this date. So you're just left with someone who won't hurt folk hero, a good option being Valentine, who you'll want to use anyway if you're using Mehen over Egbert, as Mehen also adds a fighter, but Valentine will add a sorcerer to counter that. Egbert contends with no other paladins, so if you use him, worry not. It really shouldn't be this difficult to make an affiliation work together. And at the end of the day, they're actually not working together. Dirge really needs to be able to work better with Will in some way. It's frustrating. Of course, you could say screw Will's folk hero and go full Ceramorphosis for simplicity, and that's how Dirge scales anyway. But Will's folk hero is really one of the strongest buffs in the game if you can stack it up. So why wouldn't you want to when they're from the same affiliation anyway? At the end of the day, as a support with a decent buff, decent debuff, pseudo-tanking capability, alright availability, in addition to a strong affiliation, but doesn't quite require that affiliation, I'm putting him in the low A. Now let's move on to the reworked champion, Penelope, the chaotic good halfling druid / warlock in seat 12. I've always felt like she was slept on, though she's one of those I was talking about earlier, a symptom of when I ranked her versus how the game is now. She was a great buffer, with amazing knockbacks and a key piece in any click debuff or Jimothy formation. Well, they killed Jimothy, so that can't even be considered anymore. Click debuff is still good at certain sections of the game, but with the increase of overall power, it makes it a bit less important than it used to be. All reasons to go back over the tier list. And don't forget to follow Tyredack on Twitch. At any rate, we're specifically looking at this adorable bundle of chaotic nature. And as a reminder, I generally just go over the core mechanics or direct changes of a reworked champion's kit, not a full breakdown. Check out the video that champion was previously featured in if you were curious. To start, her basic attack still knocks back, and is still tied to her Have You Met My Friends, which debuffs enemies she doesn't kill with her basic attack. The big change comes in the form of the addition of a new formation ability, Insect Plague. Upon entering an area, she will summon 4 medium-sized, randomly positioned insect swarms on the battlefield. Enemies who are in the swarms are slowed by 100%, and will be afflicted with the Have You Met My Friends debuff. The slow can stack multiplicatively if an enemy is inside multiple swarms. Every second 1 or more enemies are in a swarm, the slow effect is additively reduced by 1%. And when the slow effect reaches 40%, the swarm disappears entirely. She also still has Chewinga Mask, but the proc now triggers when an enemy enters one of her insect swarms, which is actually a much more reliable proc than your formation coming under attack. As before you had to take a hit, which can be very dangerous at certain stages of the game, and now it's when an enemy reaches something that will lock them down, before they even get to you. Chewinga Mask still works the same, but it's unique enough to go over again, granting one of 2 charms based on what she is adjacent to. A healing charm granted for tank champions, healing affected champions every second, and a tools for the job charm for each healing, support, or gold find she is adjacent to, stacking multiplicatively, which increases the damage of all champions for each charm. Now keep in mind, a DPS champion, if that's their only role, will not contribute any charms. So you do not want her adjacent to a DPS, specifically healing, support, and gold find champions for as many charm stacks as possible, which will then buff all champ damage. Now again, that's only for DPS who are only DPS, like the Dark Urge, or Artemis, or Black Viper. Those who are like Birdsong and Zorbu and count as a DPS and a support will still qualify for adding a charm. The charms will reset when you change areas, waiting for the trigger of an enemy entering a swarm again. Story time now increases the gold find of the party by 1% for each stack of story time, and you build 1 stack each time a champion adjacent to her attacks. The cap has been massively raised to 1 billion, or 1E9. So you could build up quite a gold find bonus in your run. But don't worry, you don't have to swing that many times, as she will also raise these stacks by 2.5% each time a boss enters the swarm. She still has 2 sets of specialization choices. The first are the same options, increasing her Have You Met My Friends based on either how many good champions, evil champions, or just champions are in the formation, stacking multiplicatively, scaling at different rates, all of which have been increased. This is even more important now because her equipment has changed. One Piece now scales her specialization choice here. And not only that, the specialization scales with the pre-stack, so the equipment is all the more important. The second choice is completely different. She no longer has a way to better increase her basic attack knockback, which is unfortunate, though her swarms are designed to make up for that. She can't persistently knock back in an area of effect anymore, for the trade-off of halting the advance of an enemy even better early in an encounter, and easier access to her full buffing capability. These choices are now between Fury of the Fireflies, where each time a swarm is dispersed, she will increase the effect of both Chewinga Mask's charms by 200%, stacking multiplicatively and resetting when you change areas. If you're looking for raw buffing potential, this is the one. The other 2 are interesting mechanically though. Splitting the Hive will cause a swarm to spawn a mini swarm when it's dispersed, prioritizing slapping right on top of an enemy passing through, dealing heavy bud damage and slowing using the same rules as the standard swarm, though these smaller swarms do not further drop even more swarms. Dance of the Ladybugs will reduce the cooldown of all adjacent champions' ultimate abilities by 20% each time a swarm is dispersed. At the end of the day, she's still really good, and with better equipment pre-stack scaling. Good slowing, buffing, debuffing, gold find, all-around solid champion. I will be moving her down in the spirit of reforming the tier list, but she was and still is quite good. A tier. As for this event and its roster, for the final green grass, we really have some great options. Other than the featured champions Gale and Penelope, who are great options themselves, that first flex slot really depends on who looks good for your formations. Nrak pumps out great numbers now, and he is a bit more complicated to get there via his ult, but he also has that Ceramorphosis option with a feat purchase, to synergize with the current affiliation focus of the absolute adversaries. Caddy Bree has always been rock solid, Ayla is a great tank and debuffer, Spurt is pumping some really good numbers because of his crazy scaling, who I expected to get a hotfix, but so far he's still hitting it. Orkira is an amazing debuffer, Melf has some great speed utility, Antreus also pumps out some crazy numbers with investment because of his scaling, Gazarick is a decent gold find champion for his seat. Honestly, what are you looking for? You just might find it with this batch. Anyway, thanks for checking in. Hit that like, sub, and bell. Leave a comment on what you think of Gale and the reworked Penelope. Follow me on Twitch if you care, but the only thing I really care about is this. Have a hell of a time out there, champion.